I was just thinking about how hard it was when I first started my practice and just chatting with different people about what to do, how to do it, which EHRs to use, how to do billing, just every step. I just remember it being really hard for me, and I'm not sure if you feel that way, but we've put together a whole community to help you really get to the next level of your practice. So whether you're in solo, starting a group, or already have a group, to me, just being around other people, getting access to ongoing information, that's really the way that you get to that next level. I wish I had had what we have over at practiceofthepractice.com/memberships. Over there, you're going to see just an outline of exactly how we can help you with having a sustainable solo practice, launching a group practice, or having a sustainable group practice. And you can explore all the tracks over there. You can watch some videos, see what some people have said, how they've really just grown at a different level. But for the cost of one counseling session, you can get major support for getting to that next level. And we do a 90-day money back guarantee. If your practice is not thriving in 90 days, we'll give you all your money back. So again, that's practiceofthepractice.com/memberships. This is the Practice of the Practice podcast with Joe Sanok, session number 1404. I'm Joe Sanok, your host, and welcome to the Practice of the Practice podcast, where we help you build a thriving private practice that you absolutely love. We want you to thrive. We want you to do well. We want you to have good operations, a beautiful website, good marketing, all those things that we never learned in graduate school. But we also want you to love it. We want the DNA of the practice to represent you. We want it to be something that you're proud of, that you show up to, that it's a work of art, that you say, I can't believe I was a part of building that. Now, there's going to be lots of people that help you build that. There's going to be assistants, there's going to be other clinicians, there's going to be community members, but for you to have a vision for something and to have it really come to fruition, we love doing that with people. So if you haven't joined our free community over at practiceofthepractice.com/basics, we have a whole free community that is specific for people that are kind of just getting started in either their solo practice or their group practice. So we have a full course there that's live. There's ways that you can connect with other people. That's free over at practiceofthepractice.com/basics. So I want to make sure that if you aren't connected there, we would love to have you be connected with more people that are doing what you're doing, whatever phase that is. I am so excited to have a return guest to the show. I feel like we should do something like Saturday Night Live when we have people that have been here over a certain amount, that they're part of a secret club. Daniel King is back on the show. He runs a social impact investment firm in outpatient mental health called Fireside Strategic, and also helps sellers find the right buyers. He loves working with clinician founders to build an exit that's right for them. His unique background is highly suited to mental health M&A and combining M&A law, social and organizational psychology, and investing. Daniel, welcome back to the show.
Thanks for having me. I'm glad you're not sick of me quite yet, Joe.
I'm not sick of you at all. And at the time of this recording, get to hang out with you next week at the group practice conference. So super excited about that. I'm sure by the time this airs, we'll be planning the next one and getting everything in order for that. So it's gonna be fun to hang out in person here in Traverse City.
Sure will. Traverse City, for anyone that hasn't been, is the best town. The best.
Oh. Yes, we love it here with the water, and the VIP dinner. Actually, this year we're having right on the water. Last year it was in a sushi bar that I like. This year we're doing it right on the water, so spotlighting the area in addition to all of our VIPs. So so super excited to hang out with you next week. But we're talking about selling your practice. So some things have shifted a little bit since we talked last, where you're doing not just buying, but tell us more about what you're working on now.
Yeah. So I have been running Fireside for 3.5 years now. And the focus from the beginning has been to invest in some of the larger outpatient mental health practices that remain independent, and generally looking to buy majority stakes in those. And we look to grow them. We look to keep the founders on board, help them grow those businesses. And we have some of the leading experts in the country in solving problems that most practices have. So that could mean your relationships with your payers, your insurance reimbursement rates. It could be adding psychiatry to therapy practices. It could be adding Spravato, psychological testing, TMS, all that good stuff to build truly comprehensive behavioral health practices. Can also mean improving culture and boosting clinician retention. So at Fireside, we love doing that. We love partnering with the right founders and helping them build their companies for a second exit. But over the course of doing that, I realized there were a lot of businesses that might have been a little smaller than would meet our criteria, and for whatever reason wouldn't quite work with our specific model. And a lot of these founders still want either to sell their practice or to bring on an investor or a partner that can bring value and unlock certain things that the founder on their own might not be able to do. And so I got excited by the possibility of seeing, could I actually represent them on the sell side? I spend all this time as a buyer. Could I help them become a seller? And I have now found that, yes, I can. And it's a ton of fun. And I am extremely passionate about creating partnerships where clinicians partner with non-clinicians. There's a lot of dialogue in the mental health world these days about how are investors good or evil? Right? This comes up a lot. And, I'm a big believer that the right investor can do a tremendous amount of good as well as make financial impact. But beyond that, what I'm focused on more than anything is it's less about selling your business or not selling your business. It's more about creating partnerships. Usually clinicians bring incredible skills to the table, and almost always there are certain skills they lack. And businesses never make the human or financial impact that they can without a partner on board. I'm a deep believer in this. There's all kinds of data on this. And so finding the right non-clinician partner to help unlock the version 2.0 of your practice, that excites me a ton because that's what I'm doing as a buyer too.
Yeah. Now, when you're thinking about helping people sell their practice versus buying, like I think it's probably similar to when, you're buying or selling a house. It's like when you're selling a house, you want it to look nice and get the most amount of money, for it. Whereas when you're buying a house, you want to find all the details that are wrong and, get the price lower. So as someone that's helping folks sell, when you have that hat on, how have you had to think differently?
So your analogy is a good one. It is a bit like being a real estate agent where you represent the business and there are listings, right, where practice owners can put their business up on a confidential basis so that people who happen to come across the listing aren't going to be able to guess it's that business or that house for sale.
Yeah.
In terms of thinking differently, it's given me empathy. And I like to think that I had some as a buyer. Now I have more because now putting myself in the shoes of a seller, I feel the emotion of this process. Just like when you're buying or selling a house, there's a lot of emotion around it. Same is the case if you're selling some or all of your business too. This is your baby. It's a huge part of your identity. I've always taken that seriously, and now I take it more seriously. And I feel the intensity of my clients' emotional experience around selling their business and creating partnerships where not only are you selling part of your baby, you're trusting someone else to come in and co-parent with you. It's not an easy thing to do. And so it's an extremely human process. It requires a lot of care and sensitivity. And especially in mental health, look, we're all sensitive souls. I am. And so there's an extra level of sensitivity here that's probably required that I don't necessarily think is as important in other industries. And so it's empathy and sensitivity that is really, I would say, one of the big changes for me in doing this.
Mm. Now, when you say listing it, are there particular websites that the agents will work with, or kind of like what's the Zillow of private practice counseling?
So for businesses across industries, there are a bunch of listing websites. The best known one is called Biz by Sell. I don't necessarily recommend that for your therapy practice, but Biz by Sell is one. DealStream is one I use quite a bit, which I generally think of as more credible. So if I'm representing a practice, I might put them up on dealstream.org. There's a number of them. Those two are good ones to start with because Biz by Sell is like the mass market one where anyone and their dog who's looking for a business to buy, regardless of how small it is or how big it is, especially how small it is, really, they can find very, very small businesses like an ice cream stand they might find on Biz by Sell.
Hmm.
Deal stream is, I would say, a bit more credible, a bit more professional. And so if I had a business that I felt really proud of, I would be more likely to list it there.
Mm. Okay. And then typically is like the representing agent paying for that, or is the owner of the practice paying for, like, I assume you have to pay for listings and things like that.
I think Deal stream is free right now. Biz buy
Oh, okay.
sell, I believe you have to pay. So it varies by listing service.
Okay. Now, when I guess in the same way that when you're, and we'll stick with the house analogy. So like say a year from now I'm thinking of selling my house. I'd be looking at where do I get the most ROI? Like I just saw this whole list of like, buying new garage doors like 170% ROI. So it's like, the cost of the door, you tend to like get a higher sale. So like what are those things I could do to my house to make it nicer? Whereas a bathroom renovation, you tend to lose money on that. It's more like I just want a better bathroom. And sure, you make it a little more, but it's not going to be a 1-to-1 ratio. What are those things that in the say 5 years or 3 to 5 years before selling, someone can start doing in their practice that's really going to help them get the best offer when they're ready to sell? That you're like, man, if 3 years from now someone reached out to Daniel King and they listened to this show and they did what Daniel said, you'd be like, oh man, thank goodness you positioned yourself so differently. Like what are those? What's the equivalent of the new garage door for the practice?
I just did a workshop on this yesterday with a bunch of clinicians, so it is top of mind. I would start with, for a lot of practices that I come across, especially some of the larger ones, payer concentration is a big thing. So as an
Mm,
investor, I care probably more than you do as a founder that there's diversification in your revenue. If you're in your market super reliant on Blue Cross or Aetna, as an investor, that's a huge risk. I'm concerned that Aetna could change its mind tomorrow about your 90837, right? All of a
mm,
sudden, if that's 70, 80% of your business, my investment has deteriorated in value very, very quickly. Now, that's still going to matter to you as a founder, but you're probably a little less likely to think like an investor would. And so, diminishing payer concentration, if you have it, which often, by the way, means not necessarily if Blue Cross is your best payer, I'm not necessarily suggesting you cut down the number of cases you see from them. What you might consider doing is building alternative revenue sources, exploring B2B possibilities, exploring EAPs, coaching, intensives. There are a whole
mm,
bunch of internship programs. There's a whole bunch of ways that your typical therapy practice, if they get a bit creative, can create alternative revenue streams in ways that most competitors aren't going to do that. So diminishing payer concentration is a big thing. Improving retention is another. So as an investor, I'm always concerned that clinicians might depart after I
mm,
invest. Now we're relatively warm and fuzzy, and we're looking to convey that to the clinicians. But there's always, with any kind of disruption, there's always a risk of clinician departure. So if you can
mm.
boost retention beforehand and get your retention number, I would say below 15% turnover, it's generally a threshold that we look at. I think you'd probably be in pretty good shape.
Is that per year?
That's per year. Yep.
Okay.
And then another one is diminishing the business's reliance on you as the founder. So as the founder, it's so easy to be doing absolutely everything and to trust yourself more than anyone else. But ultimately, if you're working with investors, the aim is to grow this practice way beyond you and way beyond the initial set of clinicians that you hire. And in order for that to
Mm,
happen, you are going to need to have less of a role. And so the more that you can show, hey, this practice isn't all about me, the higher the value you'll get.
mhm. How important is it in the 3 years before selling to really work with a tax professional? And, obviously, when you're working with a tax professional, you're trying to optimize your tax situation, pay as few taxes legally as possible. And there's lots of ways that you can do that. How important is it to maybe show more profit in those 3 years and pay those extra taxes to
Yeah.
really show that, hey, a lot of money is coming in, even if you could take different deductibles or things like that?
The simplest way to think about this is to determine whether you're in the relatively small practice category or whether you're in the larger category. So if your business is relatively small, the tax return is going to matter more. And that's because the investor or the buyer is going to get an SBA loan which has a whole bunch of constraints around it, and that bank is really going to care about the tax return. There needs to be a big correspondence between the tax return and your profit and loss statement.
Mm-hmm.
That doesn't matter so much if your business is larger. So if you're above $1 million, let's say, of profit, it's going to be less important because the investors you're working with are going to be more sophisticated. They're probably not going to use an SBA loan. They have access to a different type of financing. And that different type of lender, investor is going to care less and is going to reconcile the whole picture together in a more holistic way. And so at that point, it's in your interest most likely to optimize your personal tax situation. And so long as the true profitability of the business, which we aim to find out what that is, so long as that's in solid shape, then by all means, improve your personal tax situation.
Okay. Now, I've heard a lot of different ways of looking at the value of a business, and a lot of folks listening maybe have heard EBITDA, they've heard multiplier, they've heard all these kind of words of how we figure out what a practice is worth. I think and I know we've covered this before, but I think it's important to just make sure those that are listening today are on the same page. Will you go through just maybe the areas that are, I don't want to say set in stone around valuation, but are more agreed upon would probably be a better way to say. And then where are there areas like that maybe there's a little bit more either buyer or seller discussions, debate around how to value a practice?
I think there's a lot of debate in general. So, a party like a buyer or investor might come to the table with a set notion of what they think the multiple is. That doesn't mean that the clinician will agree. So I would say there probably isn't a ton of it that's truly set in stone. Our definition of set in stone is both parties agree. I think this is an industry where, in general, clinicians tend not to have business training. Many of them can build great businesses without business training. And so that means they're often excellent operators who may not know much about how to sell a business, never having done it before. So the world of mergers and acquisitions is its own world where, and I try to bridge these gaps, where investors sometimes have set expectations and founders don't, right? And so it can be very hard to align these parties together.
Yeah.
I guess I'd maybe just add to that. If we want to get into the definition of specific terms, just for the audience to start to get up to speed, would you like us to do that?
I think so. I think that just to make sure, just the quick version. I mean,
Yeah.
just so that, and people can always Google it to like learn more about them. But I think just for
Yeah.
the sake of the conversation.
Yeah. So for simplicity's sake, we've got our top line revenue. And in order to calculate our profit, we need to subtract two things. We subtract the cost of goods sold. So every expense that is associated with the delivery of the service, and if it's just pure therapy, that's the delivery of your cost of labor, mostly. And we subtract operating expenses. So we take our revenue, we subtract cost of goods sold, we subtract operating expenses, which is every other expense, your overhead, right? So your rent, that kind of stuff. Then we're left with a number, okay? And this is before you've paid yourself a cent. You have not, as the owner, in this world that I'm describing, you haven't paid yourself yet. That figure that we get, let's call the SDE, seller's discretionary earnings. So that's one measure of profitability. Once we subtract a market salary for you, and maybe that's $100,000 or $120,000 if you're a master's level clinician founder in most states, we subtract $100,000 to $120,000. Then we get what's called EBITDA. Earnings before interest, taxes, depreciation, amortization. Don't worry about all those terms for now. Just know we subtract a market salary for you, what the market would ordinarily pay from that SDE. Now we have an EBITDA. Most investors are going to value your business as a multiple of that EBITDA, that number. Okay. So often a relatively standard one for an outpatient practice that is, say, between maybe 400 and 600 of EBITDA is going to be 4x, very, very roughly. Okay. Now, if there are special aspects to your practice that most practices don't have, maybe there's a different kind of revenue stream. Maybe you have interns, a great intern program. Maybe you have very diversified payer mix. Maybe you have a preferential contract with one payer. We add all
Mhm.
of that together. Maybe that gets your multiple. Even if your EBITDA is in that range, maybe your multiple is a little higher to justify, right, the fact that you built something unique. But maybe if there's significant payer concentration, 90% of your revenue comes from Blue Cross Blue Shield. That might take us that might move the multiple a little lower. So these are some
Mm.
of the factors that in the discussions back and forth are going to affect the multiple. And that's at a very high level how an investor might find your multiple.
Yeah. Something always comes up when you're running a private practice. Well, Gusto's payroll and HR services can make it a little easier. Gusto was designed for you, the small business owner. They take the pain out of running a business, automatically calculating paychecks, filing payroll taxes, setting up open enrollment. Gusto does it all. Want more? Time tracking, health insurance, 401k, onboarding, commuter benefits, offer letters, access to HR experts. You get the idea. With Gusto, you can focus on the joy of running your business. It's super easy to set up and get started. And if you're moving from another provider, Gusto can transfer all the data for you. It's no surprise 99% of businesses said the value they get for Gusto is worth the price. And here's the best part. Because you're a listener, you get 3 months totally free. All you have to do is go to gusto.com/Joe. Again, that's gusto.com/Joe. I'm telling you, you're going to love Gusto. Get started today. Okay, so I've heard different things, and you can tell me where I'm right and wrong. I've heard that there's appropriate times to look at the average of a certain number of years for your EBITDA, and then there's other times you only look at the previous year, and then there's other times you look at only the previous 3 years. Like, when does it make sense to look at like the
Yeah.
average of, say, 5 years versus just the previous year?
It is all art. There is less science to this question than one might wish, but I'm going to give you a broad strokes answer, which is the business is smaller if the buyer is an individual, and this is a practice that is under 500 or 600 of EBITDA. It's more likely that an SBA loan is the financing source. We can talk about that if you want. And in that instance, it's probably more likely that the buyer is going to want to know, is going to look at an average of the last 3 years. They're concerned about risk personally, because if it's a buyer buying a small business like that, they're probably personally guaranteeing the loan that is required to buy the business. And so they're going to be very sensitive to risk. They're going to have a fear in the back of their head that, boy, if this business falls apart completely, if the 10 clinicians leave, I'm in real trouble. And they're personally guaranteeing that, they could lose their net worth potentially. So
Yeah.
they're going to be a bit more concerned about the historical risk. When the business is larger and has a bit more of an established history behind it, generally the negotiations, in my experience, seem to have less to do with the past 3 years. We're typically not looking at that in terms of calculating the valuation that we use.
Okay.
Provided that the business is stable and solid and it's been growing relatively steadily,
Mhm.
then we're a bit more interested in the trailing 12 months. That's often what
Mhm.
we'll use. So we'll take the current EBITDA for, let's say we're in April of 2026. We'll look at what is the average, right? What is the trailing 12 months of EBITDA for March, and then the 11 months preceding it. That'll give us a flavor. If the business were growing especially quickly, really quickly, we might look at a run rate EBITDA. In other words, what is the business on pace for now? That might be a more accurate reflection where the business truly is if it's growing quickly, because the TTM doesn't reflect the speed of growth. And we know if we're convinced that this is growing very, very quickly like a rocket ship, we're more likely to look at run rate in calculating valuation.
Mhm. What happens if the opposite happens, where they start to have like maybe the last 18 months weren't great because of just stuff that happened? Is that a bad time to be selling? I often hear people say, well, but there's so much potential here. Like, you don't see the potential of what I've built.
That's right.
But it's like, well, the reality is you're losing money like month over month. Like, how do you think through that quote potential, that turnaround when things maybe aren't on the up and up?
Most investors are going to be deterred by a situation like that. That's just
Mm.
the reality. So this isn't to say that there aren't investors who do turnarounds. I don't really know of too many in outpatient mental health who do. So is that the best time to sell your business? Probably not. Maybe there's a buyer that can only do a transaction with you for the next 3 months, and maybe the market is in general very frothy, like just like the market for housing can have these moments where it explodes. The same is the
Yeah.
case here. So I don't want to say never, but I would say in general, that's going to be a much tougher time to get the value you seek. And think about it this way. If you're coming to me as an investor and you're saying, yeah, it's not doing so well now, but I really see the potential, I don't have any pressure to buy your business now. So I might just say, well, I believe you, but could you show me?
Yeah.
Take X amount of time and show me, right? And, at times they've said, well, you guys have the skills to come in and help. Why don't you invest now at a lower valuation and help, right? And I would love to be able to help everyone. And the reality is we're a relatively small company and we have to be very selective. And there's just a point at which we're investing in humans, not just the clinicians, but we're investing in the clinician founder. Even if the clinician founder were to leave, it's their energy that started this business. We have to believe energetically in them. And so
Yeah.
that's a tough one, Joe.
Yeah. No, thanks for breaking a lot of that down for us. Now, let's get back to you as representing sellers. So we covered a lot of things around what to do when it comes to even just prepping for the sale. So someone comes to you, they're like, Daniel, I'm ready to sell. You've done a good valuation. The EBITDA makes sense for you, for them. What should they expect happens next as they're starting to look at selling their practice?
Yeah. I would build a spreadsheet where I would say, all right, now it's time to do outreach. So I'm going to approach my network, friends of friends, my network of my network, and I'm going to see if I can find an investor or a buyer. I think I would be very clear and generally am clear with folks on what type of transaction they want. So before I have the most sophisticated conversations I can with buyers and find the right buyer for you, I want to get a sense of what type of transaction is going to be most additive. Are you trying to sell 100%? Are you trying to sell a majority? Are you trying to sell a minority? All of those are possibilities. And different investors are going to be more or less excited by each of those. So we want to talk about transaction type and really understand your why. Why are you doing this? So if you want to leave completely, then 100% transaction makes sense. But if you're excited about potential, and you have good reason to be, right? If your baby has this chance to grow, and I see that potential as well, then it makes it much easier for me to convince the right investor to come on board. And so bringing on an investor, look, it's a tricky conversation. And to have it, I need to be aligned with my client. And we both need to feel excitement that this is the right direction to go in because it's a massive sea change in your business.
Mm. Now, debt's one thing we haven't really covered. And I know most small private practices that people build aren't taking on massive debt. They may take it on for, some sort of expansion, but talk about debt. And I know oftentimes that's something that, a lot of folks feel pretty just against in general. Like, how do you think through debt when it comes to, these kind of deals?
So this is a rich subject. I just did a podcast, and I think it got launched today actually, on debt in mental health investments. So this is a real elephant in the room in our transactions that I've worked on, both on the buy side and the sell side. It often is the biggest elephant in the room. Debt has a stigma around it, just like therapy did some years ago. And sometimes we as investors, we haven't done the best job. We sometimes tiptoe around it. I know I have. And I don't want to do that any longer because it's a big part of this journey. So the reality of what debt is it magnifies what is happening. So if you were to take on debt and you had the wrong partner, the wrong strategy, you could find yourself in a lot of trouble. Now, if the business is large enough, you're not personally guaranteeing it, but the costs for the business of that debt could become prohibitive. If, on the other hand, you are bringing on a partner that is the right partner, debt allows you to preserve more of your ownership in the partnership. I, as an investor, I have two basic ways to fund my investment in your business. I can use equity and I can use debt. The more equity I use, the more there's ownership dilution. The more debt I use, the more I avoid ownership dilution. Now there's an interest cost that the business will pay, not just me. The bank that I'm using for this very specialized kind of loan is going to require that the whole business is responsible for it. The whole cash flow of the business needs to stand behind that debt. And that can be a bitter pill to swallow for a lot of practice owners. What they often miss is in a transaction where you're selling a majority, you take home a very substantial amount of cash. So if I run the business and I'm thinking to myself, well, every year I pay myself $2 million, but we come in, we can pay you, I don't know what the number would be for simplicity's sake. Let's say it's $7.5 million. Okay, we can pay you $7.5 million now when the transaction closes. And yes, there'll be taxes that will take some money out of that and some deal fees. But you're going to be able to put a substantial amount of cash directly in your pocket. You're going to be able to diversify your personal net worth. Now, yes, the business takes on debt and needs to pay it. But if your partner knows how to use debt, they're a responsible user of debt, then this is part of what working with an investor is going to be. And if you want to sell your practice, I've got news for you. There's almost certainly debt involved. So it raises the stakes, and it's important to develop a conscious relationship with it. Because
So I
ultimately,
guess I have a question. So like,
yeah,
if the business, if someone buys my practice for $1 million
yeah,
and Joe Sanok gets $1 million payout and
yeah,
I retain 25% of the business to have a second exit, like you often talk about,
yeah.
am I then personally responsible for that $250,000 debt that then that business did to buy my business?
The way that we structure it, you are not personally responsible. So there is no personal guarantee. According to you, you remain the founder, you're operating the business, you're
Mm-hmm.
not personally guaranteeing it. The one exception is that if your business is on the smaller side and the loan is what's called an SBA loan, it's a government-backed loan, anyone that retains a certain percentage of equity, of ownership in the business, they are on the hook personally. That is not the case with our deals, and the deals that I typically look to structure for my sell-side clients, because the business is big enough that there isn't an SBA loan involved. So the way we structure it, no, you are not personally responsible. The business is paying for the cost of the debt, but you are not personally on the hook.
Mm-hmm. So it might be prudent if someone is working with someone that has an SBA loan to maybe set aside whatever that percentage is, or like give it some time before you invest that $1 million completely in something else.
Oh, I see what you mean. Yeah, I think the SBA structure is usually designed for like 100% type scenarios where the
Okay.
owner is leaving. It is possible to use it for a scenario where the owner is staying. That is possible. It's probably not the most typical use of it. And yes, you might be right. It may be wise just to take that money, keep it readily available just in case. But I think the reality is you want to pick your partner carefully, whether you're selling 100%, a majority, a minority. Right? You want to know going in that it has to feel right. And if it does, one of the things the debt will do, while it will reduce however much is available to the business, there's a beautiful discipline in it where now all of a sudden everyone is going to use cash flow more wisely. And you will be able to build a business that impacts more people, that brings on more clinicians, that ultimately puts more profit in everyone's pocket. But there's a discipline required to get there. So debt magnifies everything, the good and the bad.
Amazing. Well, Daniel King, the last question I always ask is if every private practitioner in the world were listening right now, what would you want them to know?
I would want them to know that you don't have to do this on your own. So if you're building a group practice and you know it has a ton of potential that hasn't quite been realized yet, that's not an accident. The world will present you with partnership opportunities if you're looking for them. And so you don't have to do it all on your own. You can work with people that are going to be better at certain aspects of the journey than you are. And if you're able on your own to build a good business that solves a lot of problems, then you're going to be all the more attractive to higher quality partners. So everything that Joe teaches you is super valuable to help grow the business. And then when it gets to a point where you truly see the potential and you can defend it, then it may be the right time to bring on a partner. And when you do, the potential is just staggering, and it's going to be way more fun to do business with the right partner. Bring on the wrong partner, that's not good. That's part of why I'm here. but know that partnerships between clinicians and non-clinicians, they're the future of the group practice world.
So awesome. Daniel, if people want to work with you in selling their practice, first tell us who would be a good fit and who might need to do a little bit of work so that you don't get a bunch of people reaching out that maybe aren't ready. And then how can they reach out to you?
Yeah. I would say if you're in the range, a minimum of sort of 400 to 500 of EBITDA, you're getting to the point where, and you want to bring on a partner, it may make sense. It gets much easier if we're sort of 800, a million, or beyond that. An investment from Fireside, if it's sort of the first investment in a state, we're typically looking at around 2 million or so of profit. So when it comes to the sell side, I would say at least sort of 400, 500. And when it comes to the investing we do on the buy side, at least 2 million. You can find me at dan@firesidestrategic.com. So that's FIRESIDE strategic.com. You can email me there, go to our website, which is firesidestrategic.com, or LinkedIn, or our podcast is Your Group Practice. So any of those are good places to find me.
So awesome. Well, thank you so much for being on the show.
Thank you for having me, Jim.
If you want to get access to these podcasts and these interviews way ahead of time, I would really suggest that you follow us on LinkedIn, follow us on Facebook, or follow us on YouTube. We stream all of these interviews with all the things that we may have to edit out. So we live stream this in addition to doing the show. Now about half of our listeners are watching us on those platforms. And so if you're looking at just learning this stuff ahead of time, way before it comes out on the actual show, we would love for you to bounce over there to one of those platforms to watch the live shows that are playing there. Also, again, if you want to be a part of our community, you can join totally for free over at practiceofthepractice.com/basics. You're going to get access to that basics course about a solo practice, that basics course about a group practice, to just get you going, get you into community. And if you like it, you can join the Practice Academy. Would love to have you join us there. We couldn't do this show without our sponsors. Today's episode was sponsored by Gusto. Gusto is who we use for our payroll solutions. I absolutely love it because it helps do all the taxes and file everything, and I don't have to worry about having a whole accounting team or bookkeeping team that's doing that payroll. So try gusto.com/Joe. You're going to get 3 months totally free. It's going to help you with your payroll and so many other things like doing open enrollment, filing payroll taxes, calculating paychecks, all that sort of stuff you can do with Gusto. Again, that's gusto.com/Joe. Thank you so much for letting me into your ears and into your brain. Have a great day. I'll talk to you soon. Special thanks to the band Silence is Sexy for that intro music, and this podcast is designed to provide accurate and authoritative information in regard to the subject matter covered. It is given with the understanding that neither the host, the producers, the publishers, or guests are rendering legal, accounting, clinical, or other professional information. If you want a professional, you should find one.